the main reason why the Buddha would say, if he wanted to describe the worst type of suffering, he would say like pains of dying, death or those of dying.
Mm-hmm.
Not because it's physically unpleasant. That's not why those pains are there. It's the mental anguish.
Mm-hmm.
So what's the main characteristic of the discomfort of death or thoughts of dying? What's the most unpleasant aspect of it? How can you describe it?
Non-control.
How is that manifested? Like when you don't have control at all.
Well, it threatens your existence.
Yeah.
It threatens yourself. Your sense,
So, what example can you experience in the world that would resemble that ultimate threat of death while you're still alive? That would partake in exactly the same nature.
Losing your memory.
Sorry?
Sickness.
All of these things, they all have this one thread in common.
Imprisonment.
Yeah, that's it. No, imprisonment. What's the main characteristic of imprisonment is confinement.
Yeah.
So generally confinement is the worst. You can have it a little bit more so, but the worst possible idea, the worst phobias are the ideas of when you're confined, you can't move, you can't breathe, you can't do anything. So confined within your own body. And you can get the glimpses of that throughout life on account of this or that, but usually the view will kind of keep it pinned to the life and circumstances, failing to understand that the possibility of confinement will ultimately be exemplified for you through the experience of death or those of dying. And that's exactly why the Buddha would describe it. So the reason why death and those of dying, pains like those of dying is so unpleasant is because of the confinement that the mind naturally resists, craves against. Not because it's unpleasant in and of itself. It might be uncomfortable, but the mental anguish does not come automatically with it. That is the mental anguish of the mind that it's now facing its confinement. And that's the worst fear, and that's the worst pain. So if the mind learns how not to move amidst confinement and everything, these examples of confinements, then eventually even death will not be able to move it, because it's exactly the same thing. You're confined within your own senses. They belong to Mara, eyes, sights, ears, nose, everything. But it's a confinement that you don't see, because, well, it's confining in this prison, but look at all the joys and pleasures I get. It was like, well, yeah, but because of those joys you are confined, not other way around. Yeah. And once you start seeing that, then you realize, okay, these are just baits that keep me confined in this environment.
So every suffering that you have is that you're not getting what you want. You're confined. There's a limit to what you can get. What your self wants to appropriate. Confinement. I'm not getting what I'm getting what I don't want. I'm crushed in.
So that's why I kept saying in the past as well, like if a person wants to contemplate death, you don't contemplate it in these abstract terms or impersonal, looking at the dead bodies and so on. No, just find things that confine you. Sense restraint, it will be confining. Saying no to your desires will be very confining. Doing things you don't want to do in terms of duties will be very confining. Do that and see whether your mind moves or not and how much, and that's your training. Not allow your mind to move amidst things that want to move you. And that eventually can result in that opening within the confinement, not left, right, below or above it. So while fully confined, the mind is released from it, turned away from it. Through dispassion, no other way. There's no other way. There's no other mystical portal that you can access through. It's just through sheer dispassion amidst the confinement and discomfort of confinement. If you have wisdom, patience, that confinement can be gradually built up, so you would not necessarily suffer so sharply immediately for a long time. But either way, sometimes you just have to. Like, it's not up to you to decide. As the Buddha said, for somebody the path towards that opening, that freedom, it's gonna be quick and unpleasant, quick and pleasant, slow and pleasant, and slow and unpleasant. But you'll only you will know that only in hindsight which way it was. And again, I think if we were to bet on which way most people would be 2.5 millennia after the Buddha, probably it's going to be slow and unpleasant for mostly everyone. Yeah. But again, even that displeasure does not mean it's going to be this excruciating torment by default automatically. No, that is determined by how much you actively crave against it. It's not like a pool of pain that you have to sort of drain and just endure through. No, it's you could technically abandon it right there and then, if you're able to face it for what it is, keep your mind dispassionate towards it, and do that endurance that we talk about in regard to that phenomenon of confinement. Then everything else will just fall away.
That's what dukkha is, confinement.
Yeah, not getting what you want, being separated from what you want, being united with what you don't want.
Whether you want it or not.
Yeah.
Being, having there being a body, there being experience.
Well, exactly. Like once you start looking at it closely,
birth,
or authentically, you recognize your own eyes, nose, senses. You had no say in their arising. You certainly had no say in what they want and their desires. You're just fully and perpetually subjected to it, pressured by it, confined by it. Confined by the duty of maintaining and feeding your desires, otherwise the mind will just become too unbearable. And yeah, that's like a hard labor prison camp. You also have to work all the time.
So recognizing your confinement, the extent of confinement that you are in, is seeing, understanding dukkha, then feeling it.
Well, yeah, I think pretty much, yeah.
And then, but you actually have to
recognizing then what brings that dukkha. You realize, well, it's not the confinement.
So it's like that you recognize the dukkha, but it's not the dukkha anymore.
You recognize the dukkha, then you recognize the source of dukkha, then you recognize the escape from dukkha. Yeah.
And the source is your fighting inside that, or fighting against that,
resisting it, resisting confinement by default at face value. So for as long as you have the view or views that, this unpleasant experience that I'm pressured by, confined by, it's caused because of such and such thing happened, that's already view that looks past the confinement, blames it on something else. So first you just have to stop acting out of those views. You might think, I suffer because he said something that upset me, but because I restrain, I don't feel that view, and then that view actually falls away, and I realize, well, I suffer because suffering arisen. That's it. Yesterday he said something, another day somebody else didn't do something. So it's always something that's going to be seemingly the reason at the face value, but fundamentally I suffer because suffering is present. I suffer because I resist confinement. That's it. Presence of resistance means suffering. Absence of resistance means not suffering amidst confinement. And that's exactly what suttas describe. Those who understand this, they don't suffer amidst the suffering. So the extent of confinement reveals the extent of dukkha, because it shows the extent of your resistance towards it. So that's the first, the Four Noble Truths. So then how do you tame your mind to remove any trace of resistance within confinement? Whether it's a confinement of desire, pressure to act out, any other type of confinement, how do you train your mind? Well, that's the Noble Eightfold Path. You realize, okay, so it's not, I can't decide it by will to tell this mind to stop resisting it. kicking and screaming like a wild animal. But if I adhere to certain behaviors, avoid certain other behaviors, cultivate skillful things, avoid unskillful things, eat suitable food, not unsuitable food, tame my senses, that animal will have to calm down. And when that animal calms down, my view will be fulfilled. View of freedom amidst confinement that I understood. And that's like Sotapanna's understanding that can then lead to arahantship if he fully tames that mind within what he already understood.